Hey, hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome again to this podcast series on security. And I'm delighted to welcome back Pagrasti Rashim, who is the Chief Security Officer with a leading telecommunications company in ASEAN.
Hi, good afternoon all.
I'm also delighted to welcome Srini B, who is the Senior Director with Nokia Software.
Afternoon, Manoj.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. So this week, we thought it's a great time to talk about the challenges that the new world order has imposed on all of us. In recent weeks, we have COVID-19 and we have restrictions on work from office for most of us. We are all working from home. And I think there are significant implications of this. So are organizations prepared? What are the implications that we have today as far as this remote working is concerned? Are companies really ready to deal with remote work?
I think from user perspective, they're ready for the task force that has access to remote working in some percentage. But if you put on the pandemic in this situation, we're talking about the bigger scale of the number of people who are accessing through the remote access. And I think that everyone is ready for the facilitate the spike of number of people there. There are some infrastructure to be set up, but if you're talking about numbers, I think not many corporate is ready for this one.
Mm-hmm. And what are the big risks? Let's say, so one is we are not ready. Maybe in many instances, I know that in Philippines, we are having a huge challenge with the BPO industry where the agents don't even have PCs, so they cannot work from home. So one is pure simple access of infrastructure. But let's assume that people have the ability to remotely connect to the network. And what are the security challenges they're likely to face?
Well, you can start from the user perspective first. When you're accessing your corporate service through a remote access, it means that you are accessing them from outside of the company. If you compare it, the company situation will be a controlled security environment, and then outside will be uncontrolled security environment. So in that way, it really depends on your security awareness as a people, and then the condition of the endpoints, the corporate endpoints or whatever endpoints that you have to access the service. And there are some security controls that is not established as it's not exist on the remote access. And for example, if you are accessing other external services from your endpoints, there will be no security screening like URL filtering or content filtering. That will depends on your hygiene or your habit to access outside the corporate. And of course, the risk itself will be affecting once you have, let's say, the infected from the malware, from whatever malicious website that you access, and then you're accessing the corporate. That will be additional risk for the corporate service, especially when you have certain privileged access from your sites. The other one will be how yourself to assess the current condition. Means you have internet access from your home, and then how secure it is, and what about your, let's say, your malware protection, your antivirus that we are, and how about your connection to the corporate? Is it secure enough? You can rely on the confidentiality itself, integrity itself. It really depends on the readiness of the infrastructure of the company they have right now.
So you're saying that companies have rushed this remote working, in many instances allowed a large number of people to work remotely, exposing the companies to huge amounts of risk. Srini, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I think let's look at the three areas, right? The people, the process, and the technology. What are the three areas that you have? And Parusdi has identified the first risk beautifully, which falls in the people category. That is, today, organizations have always defined a specific fixed capacity working from home. Let's say the managers or the second level managers would be actually working from home. That's how they have built the capacities. That's how they have built the mindset of people. Now, with this current situation, it's probably 75 to 90% of the employees, depending on the type of the organization, who are working from home, which puts a serious strain on the whole system. Now, the second thing is, are these people all trained? For example, the managers who are regularly working from home, who have the habit of working from home, would always have the right best practices in terms of what to do, what not to do from when you're working from home. Whether it is connecting to the trusted Wi-Fi network, using the VPN all the time when you're accessing the corporate networks. So all these are actually known best practices which could be followed by people who have the experience of working from home. Today, the situation is different. You would probably have the second category of people who would not have had any experience whatsoever of working from home, and then they would be doing that. So that poses a huge risk in terms of their capability. Obviously, they are not trained, whether they are trained properly to work from home. That's the second part. When you go to the process, I don't think any organization as a part of their BCP have prepared a plan where 90% of their people are actually working from home. So I don't think that process exists. I would say 99% of the organizations wouldn't have visualized such a scenario. So it actually puts you into a real compromising situation or an unknown territory where you are likely to get a lot more security vulnerabilities and issues into the system than you would otherwise have. Parusli talked about what kind of Wi-Fi networks that you are looking at, and then not everybody has an office supplied laptop. So people have started using whatever device they have. You call it BYOD, right? Bring your own device. So everybody looks at their own device. They try and log in. People just scramble around, put some specific software in their devices, the endpoints that Parusdi was talking about, and then start using the corporate data and start working on that. Yeah. Now, this is actually a serious problem. Whether you need to see, do you have the right type of endpoint device to actually work remotely? I don't think that is the case with many people. Secondly, are you connecting to the secure Wi-Fi network with the right level of security principles? That is again a question mark here. And then do we have the right level of software controls in the endpoints for you to allow working remotely? That's the third point which you have to consider.
So we understand that. And how do we prepare ourselves? We talked about the framework of people, process, technology. Now, this has suddenly been imposed upon you as the chief security officer of the company. What are the steps that you would do as you get started on this? Let's take the notional exercise of a large bank in this region. And, clearly some of the senior executives all have ability to work from home, but now you have extended the whole company to be able to work remotely. And the CEO has come and told you, I want everybody to work remotely. As the chief security officer, how would you go about doing it?
First thing first, of course, you cannot do it alone. And then in the scale of the crisis, if you have a section or organization that dealing with the business continuity, you have to work with them. It's your job to assess from information security risk about those conditions. But in terms of the how you're going to handle the crisis, there are some organizations that have a crisis management team. So usually we start with the one who been assigned as a business continuity manager to assess whatever plan the organization is going to put people on the working from home. So what kind of organizations, what kind of team they're going to assess? Is it really necessary for them to access service? There are some organizations has their branches, even the small branches that can be used as, you can say it like an alternative working space. So those are the control working space that we can still maintain the security controls, that we can still maintain the infrastructure to assess the infrastructure. So all your corporate notebook or your corporate laptop will be updated for the patch, antivirus. They already have some procedures for how do you reset your password if you're not coming to the office, right? Or what are the procedures, or what are the process lists for the people that actually not having their laptop on remote, suddenly they lose it or getting burgled or something. So those are those kind of risks that we discuss, stress, and then provide.
Excellent. Srini, anything you would add? You are the CIO of the bank. The CEO has just come and told you we want to do it tomorrow. Did anything else you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think, So Parusdi has covered the majority of the things. I think I would like to add a few points here. The first thing is obviously you got to build a policy, and then you first have to really define what's going to be your work from home policy. And then second thing Parusdi also alluded to is identify all the people who have never worked from home or who don't possess any experience whatsoever of working from home. They will have to be trained, and you got to run an immediate campaign first. And I think you got to train them very clearly. The third thing that I would do, obviously this is where my vendor hat comes into the picture. I would actually look at the current tools, the assets that the organization has, which will enable me to work from home, and make sure that I have the right level of capacity to ensure that the load that is connecting to the organization is authorized and has the right level of privileges to connect to the network. So I think that's what I would immediately look and see how best I can scale up the inventory and make sure that I extend it to everybody. Then what I will also do is I would always expect that things will go wrong in such a state. So I will actually put my security operations in a high state of alert, where I will tell them that we basically increase the control measures drastically. I would say, let's just imagine that we are actually, if not in a state of attack, at least coming close to the attack. So let's try and improve the surveillance to a heightened level and make sure that you are actually looking at, if not everything, you are looking at things, the magnifying glass, and what you were actually doing earlier. So that's what I would do, and that's what I would add to what Parvati has meant.
Great. In hindsight, as you look back, what could you have done to prepare better from an infrastructure standpoint?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, this crisis is new for us, new for everyone, right? So we are not ready for dealing with this fast pandemic and then the fast of people that are going to be affected. So if I'm going to address regarding the infrastructure, we'll be more into the flexibility and then the capacity and also the interoperability, how easy the connection can be provisioning to the corporate user, and then how flexible the infrastructure can withstand on the spiking of demands of the connections. And of course, there are two things that I want to have besides the capacity and then how the speed of the provisioning will be my visibility on their activity. Because once everyone's working from home, the only visible that you have from their activity will be their activity throughout the endpoints to access the corporate service. And of course, will be how flexible, what kind of features that can be implemented as a security controls within those access points from the endpoints, from the user endpoints throughout the internet, front line of the corporate service and then to the back end of the service.
Yeah, from my side, I think a couple of additions that I would do since you've asked for specific measures with regard to the infrastructure. The first thing that I would actually do is make sure that multi-factor authentication becomes pretty much a norm for everybody who's actually logging into the corporate network. I would say password-based authentication is not going to be enough. So going forward, I would extend multi-factor authentication at least to 60 to 70% of the users who are actually accessing the corporate network. That's something which I would make mandatory going forward. And I think that's what many corporates will do going forward, if not already done. The second one is actually look at the VPN. So whether the current VPN is capable enough to actually handle the serious loads that we are talking about. And I think going forward, this particular situation that we are in will make a great change in the way organizations are looking at the VPNs. So there will be focus on expanded capacity around VPN. So that's something which will pretty much be required. Then the third one, which I would do is look at any specific policies that are required to be set up on firewall. Today, the assumption is that all the traffic will pretty much reside in the perimeter. But as you start working from home, you are actually accessing your crown jewels outside your perimeter. So what are you really going to do to make sure that the access to the corporate information, corporate applications that is happening in a secure way? So you got to revisit your firewall policies. Then I would look at my capacity, my antivirus software. Now, it's a given thing that your antivirus software, especially in the case of BYOD, your antivirus software may not be up to date. So are there any means to which you can actually push antivirus software into different endpoints and make it a mandatory thing even before you start accessing the corporate network? So basically, look at innovative means to protect the endpoints that the users will be using. Irrespective of what they use, you should have the capability to push the right level of antivirus software into these endpoints.
Besides what Srini mentions, there will be certain area. When you're talking about the working from home within long durations and similar like this case, from information security, we kind of work with the basic security control within the endpoint itself because the antivirus need to be updated, right? And then the patch, probably there are some security patch that need to be released for the OSs or preview from the applications. And they also probably security, maturity control, like kind of disencryptions, or even some organization, they have a data leakage protection that need to connect to the corporate service. So the foundation of the security service is that usually the corporate deploy will be based on assumptions that the users is going to the corporate and then check in or log in into the internal network of the corporate. And what will happen if they are suddenly being working remotely within a long period? And then they are not checking in on the internal. They do have a VPNs, but they are not all have. Probably most of them has emails only, or probably some applications only that can access from the internet.
And while we talk a lot about technology, Manoj, I think we have to address the process part very effectively and efficiently here. Coming back to your question that how would you do it differently if you are faced with a similar situation tomorrow? I would certainly build a set of guidelines, make sure that we test them, and then we make sure that we improve the awareness. And see, there are things in your control as a corporate, and there are things that are not in your control. Parusdi and I just talked about things which are pretty much in the control of the corporate. But now there is an additional complexity that comes to the fore in the form of things that are not in control of the corporate, right? For example, how do you make sure that you secure the home router of the individual? How do you make sure that the default login name and password, which happens to be admin and admin for every router that shipped, is actually changed and people are actually making sure that the routers are becoming secure? Number two, how do you ensure that the updates are properly installed onto the routers or on the endpoint system? So how do you drive this? And you don't even have the capability to check these. And this becomes a big risk because an infected endpoint which is connecting to the corporate network is pretty much like the coronavirus, can pretty much infect the whole network and all the tenants who are actually using the network. Also, this is the time you are likely to have maximum scams and phishing emails. People are actually working in an overdrive mode. You will have maximum phishing emails going to all the employees, forcing them to click on spurious links, which will take them to malicious sites. And you will also have these financial scams. You call them work from home scams for want of a better word. So how do you really train the employees to avoid these? Today, we don't have any one of them done for majority of the employees. So I would actually focus on these as well, in addition to what Rusdi and me mentioned earlier.
So that's very comprehensive. And thanks for that. Let's say from a government standpoint, because now this is becoming a new normal. Our environment's being better, no traffic jams. Possibly, I'm hoping that we will not forget the benefit that these maybe a couple of weeks away from work has brought to the environment. We do see a way forward in which remote working in a way becomes a norm. We may have a lot of positive benefits for society as a whole. What do you see is government's role? Can they do something? Instead of enterprises all spending so much of money in the physical environment, the government guarantees all of our security. But in the internet environment, we all have to invest a lot more for our personal security. So do you see a more important role governments can play in this new emerging world order?
Okay, so the government in this situation can provide us with at least security awareness and how to properly working from home in terms of the security perspective. Usually on the National Computer Security Incident Response, they usually provide you with this kind of guidelines. So I think this is the time when these kind of agencies step up and then providing much more frequent, much more user-friendly related to how to working from home, to working remotely without sacrificing your security area. Then in some way, since the concern will be accessing the internet, the dark part of the internet, the program like internet or safe surfing for the internet will need to be boosted out, because now everyone is remotely working. Now everyone's aware on how convenient is. Like you say, it's a new norm. Everyone say that we don't need to face traffic jam. So there are some people that that this is a much more convenient way to working. So it means that how the government protecting from the safe surfing for the internet. I think those are it. But most of the cases will be awareness of the people, because they cannot cover all. The infrastructure is quite huge to be covered. But people can be rich and then can be educated, can be build the culture for the security. That's what I think.
Yeah, we are all educated heavily on how to sanitize our hands, wash our hands, but I don't think we're investing enough to tell people how to behave.
I think just to add what Paras said, what is the primary role of government? I think government's role is to drive it from a regulatory perspective, build policies at the country level as well as at the state level to ensure that these policies are adhered to, and build a framework for making sure that these policies are followed on a regular basis. And last but not the least, I think it's again government's role to make sure that the education system is equipped enough to actually drive the awareness and all these things. Right? So if you look at all these four buckets, I think first things, again, coming back to this context where we have something of this sort happening, I think there must be focused policies on cyber security front where there is a reference to what happens in situations like this. What are the do's and don'ts? What are the things that different ecosystem players should implement? For example, what should the device manufacturers do? What should the telco service providers do who are actually providing the connectivity? What should users do? So there needs to be a policy on how such situations which are really pushing the boundaries of the system happen and how each of these ecosystem players should behave. That's something which the government should certainly make. And obviously, there needs to be a mandate that should go from the government to continuously test these kind of scenarios and test the readiness of organizations to meet these kind of scenarios. And that's something which must be made mandatory, if you ask me, that these corporates should repeatedly test.
Correct. How about governments also taking more proactive efforts against the bad actors? In a way that, yes, I think we are doing enough to put people who are caught with cybercrime behind bars and penalizing them, but also proactively, in our physical environments, if somebody creates a mischief, the government is proactively putting in policies and measures so that people don't. Are we doing enough in the cyber environment to proactively, as a government, take initiatives to reduce bad actors and their behavior? And is there a room to do something interesting there so that the pressure on every enterprise and every individual is less?
I would say this is very country specific, Manoj. Some countries are taking cybersecurity very seriously. For example, Singapore, there is nothing like privacy. People are watching what is your social profile, what is your social behavior like. People are watching everything that you do online. There are tools that the government has invested in, and then they are making it as tight as possible. On the other hand, there are some countries, which I obviously don't want to name, the developing countries, which have pretty much given a free hand and they haven't really implemented because their priorities are completely different. They feel that cybersecurity is not their priority. Their priority is possibly to actually provide basic necessities to their people. So there is a big gap in the way, and this is very much specific from country to country. Not just governments. In fact, if you look at the way, right, cybersecurity is not just a cybersecurity issue anymore. So I was actually talking to somebody in the US last time. The likes of Facebook, the likes of LinkedIn, the likes of Twitter are actually assuming quasi-governmental positions. Would you ever imagine that a division for preventing child abuse, a division for preventing drug abuse, these divisions are going to be available outside of any government? The answer for all of us would be no. But today, if you look at some of the departments that Facebook has, country-wise, there are divisions which focus on preventing child abuse over social media platforms. So already governments are pushing these large social media organizations and large corporates who play in this online world to adopt some of these practices to punish bad actors, proactively identify and go after them. And I think that's something which is already happening, and there needs to be bigger push from governments to drive this.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Well, just want to point that there are computer security incident response teams in the national scale in some country. So, for example, I think Singapore definitely has it. Indonesia has it. So those are the agency or the representative of the government that has the ownership on how to secure our cybersecurity. So we can start from them. There are some services like Pak Trini mentions, the more technical that going to be addressed by those organizations, there will be additional cost for that one. So I think I'm going to start much more into people, providing them with awareness on how the cybersecurity have to be respond, not just in terms of the cybersecurity attack, but in terms of for example, like this one, the pandemic that affecting everyone's aspect. So I think that organization will be one of the very important part of the government that going to drive to be enable our cybersecurity awareness.
Excellent. So I think that is good. We covered a wide range of issues. One last common point I want to ask is what is expected of individuals in such times? Companies pay for people's broadband connections today, mobile phone connections today. So should companies be paying for people's security connections so that people have secure access from home? Is that becoming a norm? That's number one. Number two is what more should people do to keep themselves safe at a very top level?
So the answer will be yes and then no. It depends on the requirements. There are some people that really require for that one. But in terms of the security, I think the corporate has to address that one and how to maintain the security control that can be controlled by the corporate. So if I am the person that eligible for working from home or remotely working, there will be additional costs for me for extra security controls when I'm working at home. But regarding the transportation, etc., there will be something. I mean, there are certain ways a corporate can address that one through a certain allowance or through a certain facility, etc.
So one thing is obviously corporates paying for the bandwidth and all that. I guess I agree with Parusdi. By not traveling, you are able to actually save a lot of time and effort and money. So that should pretty much be sufficient for you to pretty much invest on high-speed broadband connect. I mean, as individuals, obviously, the first thing that I would do is consider the importance of security when you're working from home. That's what I would do as an individual. Try and follow the processes to the last T. Try and be part of the training or the campaign programs. Try and understand how my endpoint can be compromised. And the problem is, it's like coronavirus, right? If I get compromised, I'm actually going to compromise the whole network and bring down the whole network. So how do I ensure that I don't do this? So that's something which people have to do. People have to follow the basic hygiene, the basic 101 of using their devices, working from home. And these things have to be followed to the last T and take this a lot more seriously than what they are doing today. So I think these are the two things. Obviously, you should not click on phishing mails. You have to be a lot more careful in terms of working from home than you would otherwise do when you are residing inside a corporate network or inside a perimeter of a corporate network. So that's what I would actually urge people to do.
Well, based on this experience, I think it's come to be one of the things that all people have to invest time on how to secure themselves, because the remote working or the working from home or whatever you call it will be our new norm. So invest time on your side on how to prevent yourself from the security threat and how to become aware of this one. You are not aiming to be a professionally excel on this cybersecurity, but you're aiming for the people that are aware enough regarding the risks of the cybersecurity and how to address that one. If you are not, spend some time on invest your time on security awareness.
Excellent. Hey, thank you very much. I think that was a fantastic conversation. I think we learned a lot. I hope this is useful to all the listeners. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Parusdi, Trini, for supporting this conversation. And we'll continue the conversation next week on another session.
Thank you, Pa. Stay safe, stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you.